So let's start with some introductions here. We have, like I said, a powerhouse panel which is sitting right next to me. I'm going to ask them each to take a minute or so and just introduce themselves and their firms. Why don't we start at the end over here with Nakul?
Hey, I'm Nakul. I'm a partner at Lightspeed Venture Partners. We are primarily an early stage focused firm. We invest in consumer and enterprise businesses, been around for 2 decades now, and I tend to focus more on enterprise opportunities.
Hi folks, I'm Ankit Jain, one of the founding partners of Gradient Ventures. It's Google's new AI-focused fund. We invest at the seed and Series A level, so $1 to $10 million checks. Previous to this, I was running my own startup, a mobile intelligence company that had a little piece of software running on about 250 million phones to help personalized applications on those platforms. That got acquired in 2015 by a company some of you might have heard, a company called SimilarWeb. Before that, I spent a lot of time building Google Play, and I was running a big part of the Play team. So excited to be here, and thanks for having me.
Shilpa?
I am a roboticist. I have been working on different kind of robots for the past 15 years. My latest work was at Neuro, which is a startup. It is working on making autonomous delivery robots. And before that, I worked in Apple, which I cannot speak about because of their secrecy. And before that, I was at Bosch, working on autonomous vehicles. I have built and worked with really incredible talent in both machine learning, robotics, and software engineering. However, the work, I think, that has been the most exciting time of my life was an expedition that I worked on, which took me to Antarctica, working on an underwater robot. This was a childhood dream, and this was filmed on a National Geographic documentary, and nothing compared after that, even autonomous cars.
Wonderful, thank you. See, we learned such interesting things about our panelists over here. I'm going to start us off with a few questions, but we will also save some time, so if you have questions in the audience, we'll make it interactive. Please think about those questions and hold them. I'll save a few minutes in the end. But let's start us off by first defining AI. This is such a broad term now, and so many people use it. What do we mean when we say AI?
So from my robotics background, I will invoke the definition that Turing used. An artificially intelligent agent is one that a human cannot distinguish from a human. Now, what does this mean? This consists of 3 main problems, in my opinion. So first problem that we need to solve is perception, which means using all the sensor information to build a model of the world. And in order to be indistinguishable from humans, the agent should also do natural language processing. So perception and natural language processing fall in the perception domain. The next interesting set of problems is decision making, which is by far the hardest set of problems. This consists of making a sequential set of decisions that maximize the agent's reward. This also involves predicting how the world around us must evolve in the next few, let's say, epochs, which may be seconds, years, based on the agent. Again, one of the hardest problems in all domains, including weather prediction, society prediction, prediction in robotics. And finally, the other big part of decision making is social intelligence, which is reading emotional cues and responding appropriately. And we are not even close to addressing that problem. And finally, the third set of problems is acting, which means finding where you are in the world and moving, and then being able to manipulate different kind of objects. So this is a broad definition, and I believe we have made a lot of progress in solving perception and natural language processing, but there is a huge set of problems that are still open.
So I really like that definition. I'm going to step it up one level so that maybe we can, as we go through this discussion, it might be helpful, but I think this is a very, very good definition. Professor Michael Jordan at Berkeley recently published a blog post about what in AI is hype and what's possible in the future, and he defined AI, well, first of all, he debunked the whole idea of AI being what today's technology is. He talked about it as 2 buckets of companies or products that are being built. Those that are intelligent infrastructures that enable intelligent decision making, and the other kind that are intelligence augmentation augmentation technologies. So companies that are enabling others to make intelligent decisions, and companies or products that are augmenting us. So if you think about the company that Balan just talked about before this panel, you would think of them in the second bucket. If you think about a lot of the auto ML-like technologies, the platform companies, they're the intelligent infrastructure companies.
Yeah, I think of it similarly. At least in the startup world, I think of AI as if you're recommending a data-driven decision that otherwise a person would make a qualitative judgment on, that's AI for me in the startup context. So if you're pitching me an AI for recruiting solution, I'd ask is, are you recommending whom to hire? If you're not recommending that, ultimately it's statistical analysis. So I do think AI is thrown around in the startup world. A lot of problems don't need true AI, the kind of what we see in the movie Terminator. It's much more simpler and much more data-driven decision making in my mind, at least.
I love, Nakul, that you brought us back towards data and sort of a very pragmatic definition of AI as it exists today. We have a lot of entrepreneurs in the audience, and so I want to keep us on that narrow focus of the entrepreneurial side. So let's talk about where the opportunities really are. And let me start with the basic question that everybody agrees in AI, we need a lot of data to make it useful. And by a lot, we really mean a lot. If you really see where AI has been successful, it wasn't just training them on 1,000 images or 10,000 images or 100,000 images. It was when we got to the millions and billions that it started really becoming effective. And so the first question that comes up for an entrepreneur is, these large data sets exist in the big companies. Some people call them FANG, et cetera, Facebook, Amazon, Google, et cetera. How does a startup succeed in the AI ecosystem? Where does that opportunity exist? Take it in any order, whoever wants to really answer that
Shilpa?
question.
Sure, of course. So definitely data is one of the biggest inputs to any AI system, which is mostly deep learning based. So in this context, speaking from an algorithmic perspective, there are a few opportunities. Two opportunities in the data context is first, to develop algorithms that don't need so much data itself. Now that is no joke to do. We have not been able to do that. But if we do that, this is a huge success because we don't need the data itself. The second big problem I have seen in autonomous driving is this need for creating label data. Huge amounts of infrastructure and work needs to be done. Is this really necessary? Maybe there are algorithms that can use small amount of label data and the rest as in the data that is unlabeled in an unsupervised form. So these two are certainly algorithmic explorations that can be done if someone has a good idea. This doesn't need a lot of data. What you can use is existing tools. Google has plenty of good tools which help us get started soon. The other two domains that are ripe, that are low-hanging fruit, is any domain that requires processing of images and finding patterns. So one example is healthcare. For example, finding patterns in MRIs, that's one. Google is doing something like that with scans of eyes to detect some retinal degeneration. So these two, and then also other applications such as agriculture, which can rely on imaging to find weeds. So these, I think, are my top priority really in terms of low-hanging fruit, are healthcare, agriculture, and perhaps robotics, which is by far the hardest problem, in my opinion.
So, as we think about it, I think there's some fields, as Shilpa alluded to, where you need a lot of data. I think computer vision is one of them, and there's been some very interesting algorithmic breakthroughs already. The ideas of transfer learning, being able to learn on a very large set of data, but then apply the same model or certain tweaks to that model in other areas where you don't have as much data. But I think, I want to challenge this idea that you need data for all kinds of AI. I think you need data for certain kinds of AI, but if you go back to Shilpa's original definition of AI being something that mimics humans, you actually don't need that much data. I don't think we're there yet, but that's the direction we're trying to go in. As humans, as children really, think about the number of times you have to see a parent before you realize this is your parent. It's not millions of times, it's not billions of times. By probably week 2 or 3, even the dad is recognized by the child. And so I think as As our algorithms become better, and as some of these breakthroughs happen, we will have methods where you need sparser sets of data to have these things. The second thing, there's a whole field of AI today called generative learning. As humans, we do two things. We understand the world, but then we help create the world. We help create these conversations. We help create products, art, music. What if you could have AI that generates things as well? And some of the early breakthroughs have happened in the last couple of years. So there's startups that are there that are generating music. There's startups that are generating art. Some startups are starting to generate code. And some of you might have heard about the videos that are going around where it's completely fake in terms of what's there. It can be Obama talking when it's actually somebody else who's generating that video. So what if there could be technology or algorithms that can generate data, given a small set of data, actually generate all the related data in the same latent space so that you can train models that need more data even without having it?
So I have a slightly different stance. Again, maybe bringing it back to the startup ecosystem. I think unfair access to data, at least in the startup or the tech landscape today, is extremely important if you're building an AI company. So I think where AI is going, where what you're saying is you start with a small set of data and expand on that in a machine-driven way. I don't think we are there yet. So from the purpose of an entrepreneur who's building a startup today, I'd say I focus when somebody tells me AI for X, I'm asking them, what is your unfair access to data? Is your own application collecting data, or are you relying on scraping LinkedIn data for, again, recommending better recruits, right? Because if you're doing that, I bet you I can pull 5 engineers from Facebook and 5 engineers from Google, give them the same data, and they'll come up with roughly the same recommendations working in isolation. So I definitely still think we are in a world today where data is the first step. Algorithms are not easy. You still need very high quality engineers, but the first step in my mind is at least still data.
Yeah, but just kind of doubling on, so I agree. Today, a lot of today's algorithms require data, but there's a lot of opportunities beyond where a lot of us in Silicon Valley are often thinking about. So when we talk about opportunities, think about the last 5 years. There was this whole buzz time, if you will, for big data. Then there was predictive analytics. All these different industries put in sensors and put in big data systems to collect data, but nothing's actually happened in a lot of those industries other than nice charts. What if you could actually add the prediction layer? So go after industries where there is data already in place, but no one's taken the algorithms and connected those two pieces together.
Yep.
Ankit, I think you're taking me in a direction which should be of interest to the entrepreneurs over here, which is where is it that you see which would be a good area for a startup entrepreneur who doesn't have an idea yet? They should look for data, as Nakul said. You must have some unfair access to data if you are going to build something where you have the predictive layer, where you leverage AI algorithms. What are, generally speaking, some areas and advice you would have entrepreneurs should look towards, and areas that are bad, in other words, would not likely to be productive to a startup person? And also maybe we can give an example or two of some companies. This is a chance for you to perhaps even talk about one of your own companies that you are associated with, which could be a way for a startup to think about being successful in AI space, which is different from Google or Facebook being successful applying AI.
Sure. So I'll take this first. So I think tying both of these, the previous question and this question together, there's a company we invested in about 6 months ago, a company called Pull Request, a company out of Austin, Texas, which does code reviews as a service. So today, they pair teams that want their code to be reviewed with human code reviewers who go through their code bases and give them feedback, and have saved multiple companies from all kinds of leaks of data, leaks of personal information. But the ultimate goal here is to get the largest data set of code before, human annotations, and code after. If you can build that data set and that moat, you can then build the learning systems to automate code review and possibly automate code generation. So as you think about industries to go after, sometimes you can't think about what is my AI product today. You have to sometimes step back and say, well, if I want to get to this world 5 years from now, how do I step back, look at the world today, and slowly make my way through? Data plus algorithm plus some amount of defensibility. I think there's a lot of opportunity in a few vertical fields. I think agriculture, as Shilpa said, is a very interesting field, both from what's happening at the farm to the entire supply chain. The way the supply chain of agriculture, I'll give one example, works is, let's say you pick tomatoes at a farm. By the time, the way the tomatoes get from the farm to the place you buy them, the tomatoes change hands probably a dozen or more times, and at every time there's inspection done by humans to see what the quality of the tomatoes is. Is this still grade A, or do you want to separate the grade A tomatoes from the grade AA tomatoes? And it's humans that are doing this. The same thing happens with avocados and every piece of produce that you see. That's something that AI can play a big role in because it's visual. So you think about which different kinds of perception you have, go after certain industries, and you can find all kinds of opportunities.
Yeah, I think, I tend to start with where are you collecting data. I think there are two approaches to it. One is you build an application like I think what pull request is doing, where the application is providing some value, but in process of providing that value, it's also collecting data. And step two is to build the algorithms and the longer term vision. I think there the key is that on day zero, you set up the architecture in a way, the tech stack in a way that when that vision comes through, you actually can act in an algorithmic manner on the data. The only other exception there I've seen on this approach is if you can go into really vertical markets which have large incumbents. So, for instance, one of my portfolio companies works in the construction industry. They do AI for scheduling construction projects, right? So, large hotel buildings are today, the task is scheduled on Microsoft projects and basically Gantt charts of activities for the next 3 years of building that building. So, they went to these large buildings, companies like Bechtel, and got the data from them. That data is not publicly available to another set of engineers coming out of Facebook anyways, right? So if you have the relationships and they'll co-invest with the seed investors and give you some unfair access, then that 2-year period becomes your unfair access to data, and by the time you have a real product in the market, you have some edge on the next startup who's trying to copy you.
Shilpa, did you want to add something to that? I also want to take this opportunity. If people have questions, we have microphones over here in the middle. If you want to walk up to that, I'd be happy to save a minute or two. Otherwise, we'll keep continuing our conversation over here. So just line up over here at the microphone if you have a question. Shilpa?
I'll just reiterate that the easiest problem to solve is anything that does with images and processing data in images. So any application that relies on manual inspection of images is ripe for disruption at the time using automated deep learning techniques.
Thank you. I see we have some questions here, so why don't we start us off over here in front?
Okay. Hi guys, thank you for coming. This question is for Ankit, if you don't mind. So the dichotomy that you drew between intelligent infrastructure and intelligent augmentation, how do you reconcile that with what Nakul was talking about of basically letting the AI doing the decision making, right? Getting a decision out of the AI. Would we ever hand over decision making to the computer, or how do you fit that into that intelligent design or intelligent augmentation? Thank you.
I think it's an interesting question. I think we already in different micro ways, if you will, hand over decision making. When you request an Uber, it's not a human that's making a decision of which Uber should come to you on which route. It is an intelligent system that is doing that already today. So when we talk about intelligence systems or intelligence augmentation versus intelligence infrastructure, I would put the Uber platform, if you will, in the infrastructure way. It's enabling a lot of people to act in intelligent ways. When we talk about intelligence augmentation, I would think more on the medical imaging side of things, where there's a lot of companies that are processing MRIs or different kinds of scans, giving hints to the radiologist or the doctors to say, look at these screens within the scan first, because they seem like the place where the problem is, but they're not giving a prediction. They're just giving hints to the person who is the expert in the area.
Yeah, I'd just add that I meant not just decision, but decision recommendation, right? You can still leave the last point to the human, right? So you can recommend which article to read. Google already does that every morning, right? And I still can make the decision whether or not to read, but Google is kind of filtering what I would do 10 years ago manually.
And the Uber driver can still go a different route if they choose to.
Yeah.
My name is.
Yes, I was going to say at the second microphone, why don't we have the question in the back? He's been waiting.
My name is Ram. This question is for the entire panel. You briefly touched upon the opportunities for startups and entrepreneurs, but I would like to dig in deeper. What are the critical unsolved problems that you see AI playing a major role? Number one. Number two, what is the minimal team required, and what is the kind of finance you're talking about? Thank you.
You've actually taken one of the questions that I was going to try and end us with, or at least a flavor of that question, which was to make some predictions and talk about this. What are mistakes that people are making over there? But perhaps we can frame it in the context of the unsolved problems, and if each of you wants to take a crack at that, that would be wonderful.
So as I mentioned in the beginning, we have only touched the tip of the iceberg. A lot still remains to be solved. In my experience with autonomous driving, the two biggest unsolved problems still are decision making, deciding what an autonomous car should do at any time, when to change a lane, what to do at a signal. And this inherently involves making a prediction about the world. And we humans are really bad at prediction. Our algorithms are really bad at prediction. So these two are really the key problems in this particular domain. And in terms of, if you were to ask about the kind of, let's say, the team which is needed, should I add? Yeah. So what I believe is AI is unlike many of the previous revolutions, in the sense that this is the hardest problems humans have addressed. We are building our own brain in a sense. This requires deep mathematical knowledge in a variety of disciplines. Just to do deep learning, people need at least a solid background in linear algebra, numerical optimization, calculus. In addition, they need to have this black magic in their fingers where they know how to architect a network and how to tune the weights. Getting these people is no easy feat. As you know, there is a war going on for talent, and it really is serious. I have been in recruiting positions in many places. It is not easy. And when you start talking about even more complex applications like autonomous driving, add to it more knowledge that requires differential equations, computational geometry, mechanical engineering, control. These are really, really challenging disciplines to master. And I would say what Paul Graham said, starting with a good team of people is critical, and finding these people is not easy. I don't mean to be discouraging, but this is the real state of affairs.
I'll disagree with some part of that. I think there is a necessity in the world today to have a lot of folks that can do that are at the cutting edge of research and algorithmic breakthroughs and even application breakthroughs. But I think to all the opportunities we talked about earlier, the intelligent architectures that are being built, the infrastructure that's being built by some of the largest companies, whether it's TensorFlow by Google, PyTorch by Facebook, they're enabling almost any developer today to take pre-trained models and use them and apply them. So if you take computer vision, or if you take natural language understanding, you can take what's out there and take it in a plug-and-play way. And you can make it pretty far. So I think depending on the kind of company that you're building, if you're building a robotics company today with deep reinforcement learning where there aren't great tools out there, you're absolutely right. But if you're building a tomato sorter, you probably don't need that today. Going back to the original question a little bit, I think in addition to a lot of different things, one of the things we need to do as a society is figure out how different artificial intelligence technologies plug in with our day-to-day lives. It's a societal change in figuring out how we interact with AIs, if you will, how we share blame with AIs. If you think about the world of autonomous driving, we're not there yet, but when there's an accident, a collision, who's to blame? Is there the equivalent of a black box, so you can a third-party, neutral-party black box that can replay step by step what happened? So, because there's an insurance company, will those exist? How will they exist? How will money change hands as needed? There's a lot of societal changes that have to happen. So in addition to technology changes, product changes, and infrastructure changes, I think the societal mindset change has to happen as well.
Nakul, we are actually out of time, so perhaps quickly and we can end on that
I'll
note.
just answer the question on what critical areas I think AI could address. I think healthcare would be, in my mind, the frontier which if we can get to, because right now it's mostly productivity, like automation of time and reducing time, even autonomy is kind of in that direction as much as it's a big breakthrough. But if we can crack healthcare and just overall better health for people, that would be awesome.
Well, I want to share with you, I want to end on an anecdote. I'm sorry I can't take any more questions. I know there are people lined up perhaps after that, by saying that the future for AI is bright. And since we are at the TiE conference, I recently bought a Rotimatic. For those of you who are not familiar, it makes rotis. And I can tell you, AI actually works. My wife is thrilled that we have a Rotimatic at home. So there is opportunity to apply AI into things that you've never thought of before. Rotimatic uses it to make rotis. On that note, I want to thank my panel over here. And thank you all for being such a nice audience.